When life happens, plans need to change. Shaping Change, hosted by certified financial planner Ross Marino, is dedicated to helping financial advisors better serve their clients when life takes those unexpected turns.
Welcome. Today, I am joined by Daniel Crosby, Chief Behavioral Officer at Orion Advisor Solutions. Welcome, Daniel.
Thanks, Ross. Great to be here.
I was excited to see you join Orion and become the Chief Behavioral Officer. I've followed your work for years. I've read your books. They're some of my favorite out there. But I have to say, I wasn't quite sure what you were going to do at Orion, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be impactful. So could you talk about the work you're doing right now?
Yeah, my mom's not sure what I do either. Chief Behavioral Officer is kind of a tricky title. So it's no worries if you don't know quite what a Chief Behavioral Officer does. Really, my job is divided into three parts. We call it the 3 T's, right? So we have training, tools, and technology. So on the training front, Orion is expanding its reach into practice management and advisor education. So folks should look for me to be at the forefront of educating advisors about how to implement behavioral finance in their practices. We're going to do sort of a digital first practice management suite that you'll see rolled out very soon. In terms of the tools, there's some that I think we'll talk about today on the show, but tools will be assessments, questionnaires, other things like that that will lead us to hopefully our goal is to understand our clients better than they understand themselves. So we believe that we can get there with the right set of tools, and I'll be in charge of developing those tools. And then finally, on the technology front, Orion is, of course, known for being, a big one-stop shop for fintech for advisors. And we want to behavioralize every part of our tech stack. We want to make sure that it's helping bring about great investor outcomes. And technology, I won't name names, but technology can be used to get investors to panic and overtrade and be overly active. We see certain technologies in the marketplace that are designed for that very purpose to sort of gamify investing. But on the other end, with appropriate thought and consideration, we can build technology that can help clients make great decisions. And so I'll be heading that up as well.
That's exciting. As a full disclosure, this isn't a sponsored podcast. Orion didn't sponsor this. I know you, I know your work. So I reached out to you and wanted to find out what you were doing there. And I am an Orion user, and just hearing what you're working on for that's going to be exciting, because I really think that's the advisor alpha. It's beyond the numbers. It's really helping the people think. So looking forward to see whatever you come up with. Let's start off with an observation I've had over the years. Any financial planner that works with pre-retirees, you'll notice a difference from how they view money right before they retire to how they view money right after they retire. So as an example, if you have $1 million in a 401k and you're working that week and Friday you retire, you might feel a certain way when you look at that balance of $1 million while you're working. But over the weekend, now you're retired, you wake up Monday morning, you're no longer adding to your 401k. All of a sudden, that $1 million, it may not look like as much money as it used to, Daniel. So why is that?
There's really two behavioral phenomena at work here. So the first is called mental accounting. Mental accounting means the way that we sort of mentally label and account for our money impacts the way that we save it, spend it, invest it, think about it, right? So the second thing is loss aversion, which is we have very different reactions to money that we are spending down, which is perceived as a loss, versus money that we are perhaps sitting on or holding. So if you think about your hypothetical person here who on Friday is working and has $1 million set aside, on that Friday, that money is mentally being accounted for as sort of a cushion for a future date. And it's not being viewed as a loss because it's being added upon as that person continues to work and contribute to that nest egg. On Monday, right, just 3 days later, the mental accounting changes, because no longer is this sort of my nest egg cushion, which can be grown and contributed to over time. This is now the entirety of the pot, and I will be subtracting from this incrementally over time. So we're 2.5 times as upset about a loss as we are happy about a comparably sized gain. And so the fact that we will be drawing on that money means that it's qualitatively different and less satisfying in our mind than it was just a few days previous. So we're thinking about it in new ways, and it's the difference between, it sort of sitting there or growing versus us needing to spend it down.
And that's an event where something changed in your life externally, and then all of a sudden you start to see things differently. I've noticed in people's lives when things don't necessarily change a lot, I still see the same phenomenon. I remember 20 years ago, I used to do money personality tests, and I would quiz everybody. And then the bear market hit, and then I gave them the quiz again. The answers changed. And I've also seen this with risk questionnaires or risk tolerance questionnaires. And of course, this isn't investment advice. This show is meant for professionals out there. We use risk questionnaires. We have the conversations with people. If you're deep into a bull market, you may find some people are okay with a little more risk because, well, after all, every quarter their money seems to go up. So they tend to be more aggressive. But then as soon as the bear hits, all of a sudden now they want to be a little more conservative. So even their view over how they approach risk can change within 90 days. Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, so there's a few things at work here. So let me address the personality front initially, because if you look at the most widely used measure of personality broadly, it's the Myers. Now, the Myers-Briggs is not valid. It's not reliable. This isn't an endorsement of the Myers-Briggs, but a lot of people know it. A lot of people use it, right? When you look at the Myers-Briggs, the one scale that is the SP, the sensing versus perceiving scale, right? It's sort of how planned out are you? What they found was that depending on how they asked the questions, people gave entirely different responses. So if you ask the question, how sort of scheduled are you? Most people would say, I'm not all that scheduled, right? Because they would think about being on a vacation or something and wanting to take it easy. If you ask them how scheduled are you at work, you get an entirely different result because most of us have to have some systems and processes to get by. So those questionnaires, if they're not really well normed and really well put together, are subject to some sort of goofy findings depending on the mindset that people are in. But let's talk about the bigger question here, which is risk. So this is something we're doing right now at Orion in a big way. You can look for new risk tools from us in very short order. And risk really has 3 facets. Risk-taking behavior has 3 facets. And usually we talk about it as though it's all risk tolerance. Like we use this term risk tolerance as a catch-all, but risk tolerance is really just one facet of risk-taking behavior. So let's break it down. We've got risk capacity. This is someone's ability to take risk based on their level of wealth, their timeline, their goals, like how sort of big or small their goals are, and even to some extent, their sort of level of knowledge about how markets work. All of these things contribute to their capacity to take risk. Next, we've got risk tolerance, right? Which is the part we always talk about, but we use this kind of sloppy language around it. Risk tolerance, truly conceived, is the person's long-term, relatively stable willingness to make risk-reward trade-offs, okay? So it doesn't change that much. True risk tolerance doesn't change that much. What you have, the third piece though, which is the most important piece, and I think what you and other advisors are seeing, is what's called risk composure, also called risk perception sometimes. This is someone's propensity to become emotional and to let their short-term anxieties influence their desire to make those long-term risk-reward trade-offs. So if you ask someone, right, in March of 2020, if a client comes to your office and says, get me out of the market, we're going to get wiped out. And you go, well, wait a minute. Like, what about this? Like, do you think you should be doing this, Mr. or Mrs. Client? Do you think this is a good idea for your goals, and all that? They would go, no, probably not. Right. Like, no, I know I should not be doing this. That's risk tolerance. They would go, yeah, this probably isn't a great idea, but get me out anyway. And the get me out anyway piece is the risk composure. So one of the things that we can do as professionals is to measure independently all three facets of this risk and understand what's at work, explain that to the clients. It'll tell us which clients are likely to need a phone call from us. It'll help us determine whether or not, candidly, we even want to work with a client in the first place. And it will really give us a more holistic, a fulsome understanding of how they operate with respect to risk, because one facet changes a whole lot, and that's the risk composure. And that's what you're seeing from a certain subset of clients who are just a little more anxious.
I wonder if our risk questionnaires need to focus a little more on risk composure and ask, what did you do during the last bear market? When did you make changes in your asset allocation policy? Of course, you don't use the words asset allocation policy because their eyes just rolled back in their head maybe, but when did you make changes of how much you have in any particular investment? So I don't think that's as common in most questionnaires, but hearing you describe those three aspects, I'm thinking this is going to be on the Orion cheat sheet when it finally pops out. I mean, is that part of what you guys are working on?
Yeah, it's a big part of what we're working on. I mean, you'll see it very shortly. I don't think I'm telling any company secrets here, that you'll see it very shortly. And really, we want to give people insights into client behavior. A big study came out of Canada this last Friday that I just shared today. Russell Investments in Canada, every year they look at the value added by advisors year to year. And what we find is that the value of advice is lumpy, right? Like, advisors always add value, but there's some years where they add more value than others. Most years it's on the order of 2 to 3%, right? 2 to 3% per year is the value added across about 5 or 6 different studies. We've seen this to be the case. But we also know that the value added is most pronounced when markets are most volatile. And so last year we found that advisors added about 4% of value to client portfolios, and fully 2% of that was behavioral coaching, right? Fully 2% of that was behavioral coaching, and nothing else comes close, like tax management, asset allocation. None of the other things an advisor does comes close to adding that sort of value. And yet we're kind of flying blind, right? We're kind of flying blind with our tools. We don't know which of our clients are predisposed to which behavioral biases. We can do better, and we're gonna work to give advisors tools to do better.
It's a big need in the industry. I'm certainly looking forward to that. And I know clients struggle, all investors struggle when the markets are disrupted. It's hard in March of 2020, and people want to know, what's going on? What do you think? And we don't have a clue. We don't know any more than anybody else. And I find that people ask the question, regardless of how often we say we don't make predictions, we don't forecast, they will say, I know you don't have a crystal ball, Ross, but what do you think's going on? Why do people crave that perspective so much from financial planners?
Yeah, so if there's anything we hate in the world, it's uncertainty, right? In fact, there's evidence that we actually hate uncertainty more than we hate a negative certainty. People would rather have bad news than no news. We see that time and again. There's a great study where people who were scared of needles, right? People who are scared of shots, they're put in 2 groups, right? They could choose one of 2 conditions. Like, okay, you have to get a shot. You can either pick the longest needle, right? Like, get the longest needle possible. Just, that's your option. Or you can spin this wheel over here. That's 1/3 little needles, 1/3 medium needles, 1/3 long needles. People who hate needles, by and large, say, just give me the long needle. Like, just get it over with. Like, I'd rather just get the big, long, nasty needle than deal with the uncertainty of maybe having to get it and not knowing, right? So I think there's a couple of reasons why we do this. First of all, we just hate uncertainty, right? We hate uncertainty. We can't function. We'd rather have bad news than no news at all. The second reason is I think some advisors, for all the lip service we give to really not knowing what the future is going to look like, which is, of course, the truth, right? If 2020 has taught us anything, no one knows what the future is going to look like. And that's the whole reason you diversify in the first place. We also kind of talk out of both sides of our mouth sometimes, as an industry. We go, yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, but like valuations are looking a little steep here. I don't have a crystal ball, but the Fed chair seems to be inclined to do so-and-so. So I think sometimes we cheat a little bit and we want to have our cake and eat it too. I think we need to help our clients understand that no one knows what's going to happen. Last comment here. When you looked at the financial forecasts that were given in January of 2020, it's completely hilarious because you look at the big banks all released financial forecasts. And what's incredible is every single one of them undershot the performance of the S&P dramatically. Now, if you had told them in January, there will be a world crippling virus that will kill millions of people and shutter the entire world economy, how much worse do you think their predictions would have been? So to get predictions right, you've got to forecast the future. And then you also have to correctly forecast the market response to that future event. And getting those things two right in concert is nearly impossible.
Well said. So our process at Transitus Wealth, it's a 4-step process. We ask 4 questions whenever somebody calls in because something happened in life. And I'd love to get your insight on a couple of them. So we start with question 1, which is, what's going on? I'm pretty sure all financial planners do that because they want to know, why did you call? You just retired, you might inherit some money, some event's going to happen. What's going on? Pretty straightforward. But then our second step is we want to know, how did you get here? So we want to know the story that led up to that event, but also we want to go all the way back to, if they're ready at that moment, when they were a child, what were their first money memories, anything they might share right off the bat. So explain why it's so important to understand how someone got to where they are and what their money story is.
Yeah, this is a great question. And it's a great process that you have. So Carl Jung has this great quote that I'm going to screw up profoundly here, but he says basically until you understand yourself, oh gosh, how does it go? It's until you understand yourself, things will happen and you will call it fate, basically, right? Until you understand what's going on inside of you, you're just going to assume that everything that happens to you couldn't have been any other way. Said a different way, a fish doesn't know it's wet, right? So all of us grows up in these families and these environments that teach us lessons about money that are implicit and are beneath our awareness. It's only after we call these things to awareness and we become aware of them and start to name them and label them that we're able to change them or do anything with them. Until we name them and identify them, it's just kind of oh, that's just the way it is, right? And so I actually did research a few years ago into the most common money narratives, and we came across it in kind of a funny way. I mean, it's not funny, but we were doing research on why people fought about money, right? Why couples fought about money. And in so doing, we unearthed these sort of 5 common stories that people tell themselves, these 5 different common ways of being with money. And so just real quickly, when people fight about money, the 5 things they fight about are, first, communication, right? So some people have been taught that money should be discussed openly and honestly. Others have been taught it's whatever, sex and religion and politics, you just don't talk about it. The second thing is worry, apprehension, right? Are you a big worrier about money or no? The third thing that people disagreed about was the function of money. This was actually the source of the biggest disagreement. Was money used to secure tomorrow or to enjoy today? right? Was it you to, are you going to seize the day with this money you have, or are you going to secure your future self? And then the fourth thing was orientation, right? Like, is this my money? Or is this money to sort of bless the lives of my community and my family and my church and my government, or, whatever? Or is this like mine, mine, mine? And then the last piece was importance, right? Is it important for you to be, sort of outward displays, outward trappings of wealth, like to drive a nice car, to have a nice house, things like this. And so all of them are like this, but I'll draw your attention to the one that the most people fight about, which is function, right? So like, what's the right answer for the function of money? Is it used to enjoy the day or secure tomorrow? Well, the answer is both, right? Like the answer is both, but in moderation. And so, one of the things that we're trying to do is help people better articulate these money stories and find a balance. Right? Because again, going back to the orientation, you need enough, you got to put your own sort of mask on first. You have to make sure your financial future is secure. But then once you've secured your financial future, help your church, help your community, help your kids, help your family. And so, yeah, we've got to ask questions like the kind that you ask in your process to elicit these money stories and help clients articulate them, call them out, and find balance with them.
That's excellent. So the other two questions are, what are you thinking and how are you feeling? And to kind of package this, imagine someone calls into the office and we schedule a Zoom call. We ask them, one, what's going on? And two, how did you get here? And then after they explain that, I ask 3 and 4, and I ask these two questions together, which is, so what are you thinking and how are you feeling about everything? This is when they kind of do a brain dump where they tell you what's on your mind, on their mind, like, I want to pay off my mortgage, or I want to take a bunch of money out and take the grandkids on a trip. They tell you the decisions they're making, but they go right into what they're feeling. And I used to just ask, what are you thinking? And then tried to have the conversation. But once I wrapped in, how are you feeling about it? My insight grew and I really felt I was in much better position. Why is it so important to combine those two sides?
Well, I think, first of all, one reason I'd be curious as to your experience, sometimes the thinking and feeling are going to line up and sometimes they're not, right? Like sometimes the thinking and the feeling can be very, very different and can almost seem paradoxical or confusing. So they really are different questions, right? Like feeling is not a direct extension of thinking by any means. So I think you get new information there. The second reason is because we know from studies on brain activation, right? So when you hook someone up to an fMRI machine that measures brain activity, they've done studies that look at the excitatory response of the brain, right? Like how psyched out does your brain get when you look at different images, right? So they show people images of death and violence. They show people images of sex and other things that have sort of an excitatory response. Nothing is more excitatory than money. Not death, not sex, nothing. Right? Nothing does more to kind of get your brain out of whack and get the emotional centers moving like money does. So money isn't first and foremost a thinking thing. Money is first and foremost a feeling thing that we then work backwards to put thoughts upon, right? It's almost like we have a feeling about money and then we reverse, we sort of back into a rationalization about why we feel that way. But it should be well understood, and advisors should operate as though money is primarily a feeling conversation.
The feelings are definitely where it starts. When someone says, I'd like to pay off my house, and the value of their mortgage is 1/5, 1/10 of their net worth. It may not make sense financially to certain financial planners, but emotionally, it's something they really want to do. It's a feeling, and we have to consider that. And what is the formula for that? I guess that's the art of financial planning, because you don't really have a formula. You really have to figure out and help people understand what they think, what they feel, and then make decisions based on that. I want to touch on one of your books that I thought was wonderful. It's called You're Not That Great. And I love the title because the subtitle, I think, says it's a motivational book, right? If that's on the cover. And I mentioned to Lisa Allen here, our chief revenue officer, that I was speaking with you, Daniel Crosby, the following week. And she said, "Oh, I love his book. You're Not That Great. That's my favorite book." And I laughed and said, "That's my favorite too." And she said, "But nobody ever heard of that book." So how about you just give a little plug here? What is You're Not That Great about? And why do Lisa and I just seem to love it?
So you have great taste is the reason you love it so much. So You're Not That Great emerged from a TEDx talk I did like ages ago, probably 12 or 13 years ago. I got invited to speak at a TEDx conference, and I wanted to give a talk on how sort of the acceptance of our own mediocrity can lead us to be great. And I'll say more about that in a minute. And then the book, the talk did very well. The talk was well received. And so then I wrote a book on the back of it. Incidentally, I think the book is free on Amazon Kindle. So, yes. Hey, if you're listening, go get it. You have nothing to lose except the time you spend, I guess. But so basically that's the crux of the book is 7 different examples of how accepting our own mediocrity can be, a powerful way to stimulate a good life. And in there, I talk about things like how mental illness makes people more creative, right? And makes them better leaders in some ways. How accepting that we're not that great as investors can actually lead us to put systems and processes in place that can make us really great investors. And so it's sort of a radical idea that this sort of foundational act of humility can lead you to things about which you should be very, very not humble, about things that which you should be very, very proud.
Well, when I read it, I started taking notes and I thought, this may be one of the best parenting books I've ever read, even though I don't think you really referenced much about parenting in it. But it's a great way to connect with your kids and let them know the true growth mindset, which is progress is what matters, not the gap. Pulling in a little Dan Sullivan here between where you are and what you think is awesome or exceptional or perfection, but it's just the progress step by step. Well, let's close with our typical final question. That's going to be the magic wand question, Daniel. So if I gave you this magic wand produced by Disney, so I'm pretty sure it works really well, you could wave it, you could change anything you wanted in the world. What would you change?
I think the secret to all the world's problems is good families. So I wish everyone could grow up in the kind of family that I grew up in, right? Where there's parents that love you, parents that believe you can do it, and parents that raise you, not coddle you, but believe in you and provide an environment of love and caring. I think the world would look so different if everyone grew up the way that I did. So I'm going to take your magic wand and give everyone a warm, welcoming home to grow up in with lots of good books to read.
Great way to finish. Daniel Crosby, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Thank you, Ross.
Thank you for listening to Shaping Change with Ross Marino. This show is for general information purposes only and is not intended to provide recommendations or advice. Speak with a legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions. Past performance references are historical and do not guarantee future results. Visit rlsummit.com to learn more.